Today, the World Health Organization officially announced that this is a global pandemic.
In the next several days to a week or so, we're going to continue to see things go up. We cannot be discouraged by that because the mitigation is actually working.
The unvaccinated overcrowd our hospitals. I'm moving forward with vaccination requirements wherever I can.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Otto and welcome to episode 7 of COVID Secrets. In episode 2, we went into detail about the serious injuries and deaths that are being caused by the COVID jab. We shared advice from our experts and discussed how these injuries and deaths are not being reported in order to promote the acceptance of the vaccine. In this episode, we'll deep dive into the effects that the COVID vax has specifically on women and children. We have the responsibility to protect our children from harm, especially when it's being initiated by adults who are supposed to be responsible and to protect them. The COVID vax has been one of the biggest evils of our time, and part of this agenda is to vaccinate children. Many of our experts are advocating against this and are speaking up about the severe side effects and even deaths that these vaccines are causing, and one of those being myocarditis. Dr. Brian Ardis is up first, and he goes into detail about the deadly side effects of the vaccine and the implications it will have on the future health of children and teens. He talks about how he has advocated against the vaccine being used on any child and discusses the evidence that young people who have had the vaccine are already showing signs of dangerous side effects. We'll also share clips from the COVID Second Opinion Senate hearing where doctors Aaron Kheriaty, Richard Urso, and Robert Malone, and Tom Renz, an attorney, all speak about the fraud involved in the COVID vaccine. They speak about how Pfizer didn't make their clinical trials public, even though they were authorized to do so under federal regulatory law. They also discuss the exact mechanism of what makes the COVID vax so dangerous, including how the lipid nanoparticles in the jab have the ability to cross the barriers and go into the ovaries, bone marrow, adrenal glands, and other tissues, causing serious damage.
Yeah, I've actually been asked to testify before several state legislatures, and I've done that. Kansas was the first. And the one thing I had to make very clear, this was immediately following the FDA extending the emergency use authorization of the COVID-19 shots in children ages 5 to 11. And that made me furious. And I flew up to Kansas and met with the state legislatures, even though I'm here in Dallas, Texas. I had a 3-minute opportunity for a testimony. You guys know how that works. And I made sure that on the record right up front, I wanted to make sure that everyone watching, this being recorded, the people in the building, in the room, the committee members sitting in front of me, I wanted to make sure they all knew that I knew that none of them were medical doctors of any kind. None of them were healthcare professionals of any kind, yet the people who elected them into their seat are sitting there expecting them to make healthcare decisions on behalf of their children in the state. And I said, I just want to make sure you're aware, because I know you don't have any healthcare background of any kind, you're having to rely on healthcare professionals to bring you relevant data to make decisions on. And so I gave them a publication from the CDC in my written testimony before I got there, and it was a chart showing that teenage girls, this is actually published on the CDC's website, August 18th. I had that simply put in there, and I asked them, do any of you know what this chart's actually talking about? It shows teenagers and girls and boys in America who have received the Pfizer shots. And it has a post 7-day review looking for observed heart disease called myocarditis. And I asked the group, do any of you know what myocarditis means? And they all shook their head. I said, good, I have to define it for you. Myo means muscle, cardia means heart, itis means inflammation of. And I said, look at these numbers. What the CDC published in August is that teenagers for every age range had 5 times the expected amount of heart inflammation in 7 days after the second shot. And I said, now look at the boys, the teenage boys. What did they observe in 7 days versus what they expected? And what they observed was 20 times the diagnosed myocarditis in teenage boys after 7 days of getting the Pfizer shot compared to what they expected to see. Now, they all sat there and I said, now, can any of you raise your hand and tell me, when someone is diagnosed with myocarditis at any age, can you tell me what the fatality rate or death rate is of those individuals now that have myocarditis? And none of them raised their hand. Then I turned around and looked at the audience and I said, do any of you know? What's the percentage of people that die once you're diagnosed with myocarditis in 2 years? And I said, I want it on record. None of y'all even know how deadly this condition is. Myocarditis, every single teenager on this CDC list, 20% of them will be dead in 2 years. That's the fatality rate for myocarditis, all ages around the world. And then I asked them, do you know what the fatality rate is for 5 years post being diagnosed with myocarditis, called heart inflammation? No one raised their hand. I turned around and looked at the audience. None of them knew either. And I said, great, I'm glad I came from Dallas to tell you. According to Dr. Hinton, who is a consultant with the National Health Services of the United Kingdom, he's already given these statistics worldwide. Within 5 years, 50% of every individual, regardless of age, who is diagnosed with myocarditis will be dead in 5 years. And I said, look at that CDC document again. You have hundreds of teenage boys aged 12 to 18 who are actually reported to now have myocarditis within 7 days of these Pfizer shots. 50% of the 112 12-year-olds will be dead by the age of 17. I said, now you're standing here with the opportunity this week to vote on mandating these shots for all 5 to 11-year-old children in Kansas State. And I said, I call on all district attorneys and all citizens in this state that if any of you check yes to forcing 5 to 11-year-old children in Kansas to get these shots, if one child in Kansas dies, I expect all of you to look into which ones on this committee voted yes and hold them guilty of second-degree murder. I said, these shots are already proven to cause heart failure that will lead to death in 20 to 50% of all these teenagers that have already gotten it. And now they're just going to pass it out to all kids.
We're glad to share with you, Senator, because we have quite a bit of those that aren't blanked out. And we also want to tell you, listen, the side effects, the only one that they're recognizing, that's an outright lie. I've got the Pfizer documents. Pfizer said in their FOIA documents that they released, they said, we're looking for these side effects. The FDA said, we're looking for these documents. We've got their documents showing what they're looking for. They're not sharing it with the American people because they're covering this up. Corruption was the word of the day, and I think it needs to be reiterated.
So somebody really quick in their testimony talked about what the drug companies were supposed to turn over when they made application. Yeah, Dr. Carey,
that was our
talk about that specifically. I mean,
okay. So on the day in which the Pfizer vaccine was authorized under federal regulatory law, that data had to be made public to the American people. By data, I mean the clinical trials data that Pfizer submits to the FDA, that the FDA then reviews and decides whether or not we're going to give.
And why wasn't it?
Well,
was there a waiver granted by FDA? Or?
No. What they said was, you know, we have a lot of FOIA requests, and they didn't deny that they had to release it eventually, because that would have obviously contradicted federal law. So what they said instead was like, you know, even though we have a budget of $6 billion, I think it is, you know, we only have a handful of employees to handle these FOIA requests, and, you know, they have to make a lot of photocopies of these documents.
So
they slow-walked it. 75 years.
Now a judge has ordered the release, not at 500 pages.
8 months.
But 55, yeah, so we'll get that sooner. Again, we're running out of time. I did want to talk about some of the other revelations. You mentioned FOIA. The FOIA for Japanese regulators showed that this vaccine's not staying in the muscle as we were kind of all led to believe it would happen. It's actually
animal studies from.
It's by distributing. Yeah. We know the nanolipid particle, and it also goes through some of these very difficult permeable barriers. For example, the brain. Or
yeah, I want to ask Dr. Malone that question because I've worked with lipid nanoparticles for chemotherapy. They are like garlic. They go everywhere. They can, they can slip through a door crack. They go through very tight junctions. That's what they do. That's why when I first saw the technology, I knew it was going to end up in the brain, because that's one of the things they were doing, was trying to find lipid nanoparticles to carry chemotherapeutic
Talk about
agents.
the concern about it getting into the brain.
Well, that was the actual original design for lipid nanoparticles, to be used in chemotherapy, because in order to direct chemotherapy to the brain, it's very difficult. So they were going to use lipid nanoparticles to do it. The problem was the lipid nanoparticles went into ovaries, bone marrow, adrenal glands, and other tissues. So it's still being worked on. Studies are still being done. But I was going to ask Dr. Malone, because Dr. McCullough had just talked about the fact that he has concerns. Do you have concerns for this vaccine in children, knowing that it's going in the brain, the bone marrow, the adrenals, and all these other organs?
So the answer is yes. I've said that repeatedly. I've put out a 4-minute clip in which I talk about the damage at risk to children in brain, heart, coagulopathy, reproductive systems, and immune systems. That resulted in direct attack from the Israeli Ministry of Health on my personal reputation. Multiple fact checkers denying it, but the data are incontrovertible. But to your point, Richard, and Jill and I can attest, I do have some credibility here because I did create this technology. I do know in detail. I can speak.
But you don't work for the CDC, NIH, or FDA.
No. No, I actually work for the DoD from time to time. So I do know about the untranslated regions, why they're there. I do understand explicitly in detail about reverse transcriptase and what it can do, et cetera. But I can tell you that we moved off of trying to develop further these mRNA and DNA complexes based on our work in non-human primates and in mice. We spent years with both commercial funding and various public funding, not NIH, trying to advance this technology. Many, many different cationic lipid formulations, compounds tested, screened for toxicity. We could never overcome the hyperinflammatory characteristics of these polynucleotide cationic lipid complexes. We could never get there. Now, the Carrico and Weissman assertion, and it's inside baseball. I brought Katie Carrico into this like a decade after I'd made the basic discoveries. They assert that the inclusion of the pseudouridine reduces the inflammatory response. But the data show that that is a marginal decrease, and the data also show from their competitor, it's important to remember that they are BioNTech, Katie's a vice president. So their competitor in Germany has shown very good immune response without the pseudouridine. So you're right, pseudouridine is a synthetic compound. The logic is that incorporation of pseudouridine reduces the inflammatory response, but the inflammatory response is still there. And to your point, Richard, we are clearly seeing not only specific effects associated with spike protein, but non-specific effects associated with the liponanocomplexes. How do we know that? Because Moderna gave us a presentation to their stockholders recently where they rolled out their phase 1 data on their influenza vaccine candidates that are using the same technology platform. So no spike protein associated influenza antigens. And in their hands at the 100 microgram dose, which is the dose that's used in the emergency use authorized vaccines, 90% of the subjects had adverse events compared to 30% in the placebo group. This is phase 1 data. Now that data has not been disclosed publicly, it was only disclosed to their stockholders, but what it clearly demonstrates is that the cationic lipid RNA complexes have intrinsic toxicity above and beyond just that associated with the spike. So when we get into these arguments about is it spike, is it the lipids, blah, 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 it's both, okay? We have a tendency to get binary. It's either this or that. No, it can be both. Regarding the data package from Japan that Byron Bridle first acquired, and then I think I was the first after that. People often get confused about this, but Senator, this is the thing that worries me among the most. is that limited data that was not produced to any quality standard that any clinical trial, precursor non-clinical data package I've ever seen would be allowed to be used. What the FDA and the regulatory authorities all over the world allowed was for Pfizer to collect data involving unrelated RNAs, other candidates, amalgamate it together, and submit it as a package. And in those data, which are not according to good laboratory practices, they did demonstrate that these lipid nanoparticles go all over the body, just as Richard is saying, and oddly, they seem to differentially go to ovaries and bone marrow, but ovaries relative to testes. And it's important everybody kind of latches onto this and they say, oh, there's spike protein in the ovaries. No, that's not what they measured. They didn't ever measure spike protein. What they measured was the lipid component, these synthetic lipids, which is the other thing you didn't mention in this cocktail. Okay? These synthetic lipids go to ovaries. Now, who cares? Well, when your child is born, when your daughter is born, she has all the eggs she's ever going to have in her ovaries. And we do know that, and the CDC now finally acknowledges, after women all over the world complaining about their altered menses and getting, I mean, I felt like I was in the mid 20th century. It was attributed to hysteria, much as your own story. These alterations in menstruation were believed to represent hysterical women. The CDC is now acknowledging it. The thing is that the ovary drives menstruation, as Ryan will, I'm sure, attest. Hormonally, the ovary drives menstruation. When we're seeing altered menstrual cycles, we're seeing the phenomena of postmenopausal women starting to bleed. That's a hallmark that something's going on in the ovaries. And we know that these lipids are going to the ovaries. We know that these are synthetic, abnormal fats that insert into membranes and change the charge of cell surfaces. That's all true. So all we have is this trail of breadcrumbs. And unfortunately, apparently, the FDA made a determination that they would treat these products using their standard checklist approach for a standard vaccine. And they did not use the checklist that they would use for gene therapy. And furthermore, they didn't make any special accommodation for the novel nature of this technology, which has not been previously characterized. And so what we end up with is the FDA making a decision to move forward with a data package that's grossly inadequate, that doesn't meet any standards at all, that are the norms in my industry that I've been trained on, and that is overlooking known problems. And then when patients are coming, women in particular, and complaining about these reproductive effects, they're being subjected to the same kind of character assassination and ridicule that we all get routinely from our friends Mark Zuckerberg et al. So Senator, I do, in terms of the pediatric, as somebody who is intimately familiar with this technology, I'm not too worried about the untranslated regions, but that's a formal possibility, and it absolutely should have been investigated. And the FDA has been grossly derelict in not following through on these things. But beyond that, we have a clear trail of breadcrumbs about reproductive toxicity that's not being followed up. And I am concerned about our children. I'm concerned about all of those effects: brain, heart, blood coagulation, reproductive system, immunologic system, and furthermore, they're not at risk for this virus. Why are we doing this? And mandating these vaccines for children just breaks my heart.
Next up is Dr. Paul Thomas, who we'll be hearing from throughout this episode. He talks about the concerning nature of giving children the COVID vaccine, which has the ability to modify genes and trick the body into developing an immune response, ultimately causing the body to attack itself. He also talks about the serious side effects that his pediatric patients have experienced after getting the vaccine, the very reason why he's advocating against the administration of the COVID vaccine, especially in children. We'll also hear from Dr. Brian Ardis again, who expresses his concern about junk science and censored science that is causing children to be put in harm's way. He exposes how the CDC, FDA, and the American Heart Association have intentionally hidden or delayed the serious side effects that the vaccine has caused for teenagers so that they can continue rolling out the vaccine for children, age 5 to 11. He advocates for people to reject COVID vaccines and protect children from their dangerous and deadly side effects. Hi, it's Jonathan, and thank you so much for joining me in this series. We're right towards the very end of this series right now. We just have a couple more episodes for you, and I wanted to make sure that you're completely aware that all the amazing gifts that we have offered here on this page for you are about to expire. So thank you for your consideration. Thank you for coming with me in this journey. And I really look forward to seeing the future unfold when you have the knowledge and the truth at your fingertips so that you can stand and be part of the solution. Remember, this is completely censorship free when you get the books and the DVDs, when you can access this in your own membership area. And there's a special announcement that we're going to make at the opening of the following episode. So episode 8, we're going to make a special announcement for some amazing free gifts that we're adding in that are not here currently on this page. Now, this will be added in, so when you place your order now, you'll be able to take advantage of this. It'll be immediately given to you and added to you, and anyone that's purchased in the past few days as this series has begun, you'll get access to all of this, so it's going to be really, really fantastic. But a little clue there is it's over $1,000 worth of new free gifts that are specific programs, all designed to help you specifically with many different areas of health, from vaccine injury recovery to autoimmune disease and to brain health, as 3 of the key areas that I'm going to be sharing with you, and programs in each of these specific areas that are collectively valued over $1,000. So just know that when you place your order today, you'll get given all of those gifts inside of our program. So don't miss out on that special announcement that's coming, and just know that that's already applied. So it's a great time to take advantage of this. And remember, now that I'm bringing this up with you, and we're going to be specific and break it all down so you can know more of the specifics very shortly, but now that I've let you know about this, those additional free gifts will completely expire at the close of the final episode, episode 9. We're a very short period of time away from that, so I just want you to be fully aware and just know that when you're in this program, you'll get the utmost value and support and help for your health. Now, if you felt like this information is compelling and it's helped you navigate the situations with COVID, perhaps as one of the best resources, or maybe even the very best resource that you found, the most well-rounded, the most educational, the most informative, the most factual, whatever it is that you may have perceived about this, you've been on me this far with this journey for a reason. There's something about this that's valuable. Just know that inside of this program, all the other areas that we can help you with your health are profound, and our health is the channel through which we enjoy every beautiful thing in this life. Without it, we can't do a single thing. So I encourage you to not only know about these things, but learn about what you can do to protect your health. And inside of this special program, you'll be able to do just that. And I really am excited to bring that to you. It brings me a lot of joy and happiness. I know what kind of difference it made to my wife, my family, and I want you to have that. And speaking of somebody special, there's a woman named Natalia Voloshin. She found this a number of years ago now, and she had vasculitis, which I understand to be, from my research, largely caused for many people from residual effect of vaccines throughout people's lives. And it's an environmental set of symptoms that can be fatal for many people. In this case, she was supposed to have both the legs amputated in the course of 2 weeks, so she had very little time, and she'd already spent, she literally had spent $200,000 over the course of the last 5.5 years to try to get better. She had another 3 different autoimmune conditions on top of that. And so for her, she really didn't want to live, and that was a very sad reality because she was never previously depressed. But this certainly took the wind out of her sails, and she really just wanted to give up. And I was so glad that she found us through a friend that had said, hey, you should use this. This person was a cancer survivor that had used our information about health and our documentaries on health subjects to help her. And then because of this, the woman, Natalia, she was thinking, well, I should probably hear this out. I should probably not be skeptical, even though she was naturally skeptical. And the result that this woman had was nothing short of profound. She's back to swimming and cycling. She's not in a wheelchair. I believe she's probably the happiest person I've ever met in my entire life. This touched my heart in a way that just it changed everything for me in terms of what's possible and how we can turn around injury and sickness and disease and change the outcome so that someone doesn't have to die and they can live and have joy and peace and happiness. So she used protocols that we're sharing inside of the free gifts that we're sharing. We've focused this series on COVID because that's what we promised you. So we took some time to go into other areas. You're watching that in the bonus episodes, to go in other areas to teach you about your health. But inside of this program, we go into all different areas of autoimmune disease, into brain health, into gut health, into many different conditions that people face and symptoms, and show you how to get to the core of the root causes behind this so you can get healthy and get well and be happy and enjoy your life. Thank you so much for considering this. You can join our program by simply clicking the buttons or the banner below this video, and I look forward to seeing you in this program, helping you with all these free gifts. Remember, all these free gifts are available when you place your order right now. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Dr. Paul Thomas, it's a privilege to sit and interview with you in person. Last time we were in two different countries or continents, and here we are in person, and so what a privilege to be able to sit with you. That time that we shared back several months ago now, for me was so eye-opening and so critical. The work that you've done in regard to vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies, and at very least spacing out the vaccine schedule. My thought is get the children off these injections, because I think that there's more coming. There's more in our future that we need to be aware about. But this work that you've been doing has been so critical and so formative, and so I appreciate you taking the time to share, to help enlighten people, open people's minds to some of the realities that we're facing right now in regard to the COVID-19 shot. Children are now on the bullseye. This is a huge issue. I know that you have major concerns around this, so firstly, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. You're spot on that the vaccine issue is probably the medical freedom topic of our time. And our kids are now in the crosshairs of Big Pharma with the COVID vaccine. Vaccine, if you'll call it that. This is a shot that's gene modifying and tricking people's bodies into making spike protein, the toxin, that then incorporates itself into our cells, and then we develop an immune response to that, and we're attacking our own bodies. So you have the myocarditis, we're seeing all sorts of problems. So there's nothing more important than getting the message out to parents. Folks, you have to protect your kids, because let me give you an illustration. I have 10,000 patients right now in my practice, and for the entire duration of the COVID outbreak, how many of those kids ended up in the hospital or in the emergency room?
I'm going to guess none.
Good guess. None. Not a single one of them vaccinated, not a single one of them sick enough to even end up in the emergency room.
Vaccinated against COVID.
Correct. So what we're figuring out very clearly is that COVID illness, the illness itself, is a big nothing for children. I mean, the death rate is 0.000 something, right? It's just basically 1 in a million. So they don't need this jab. This jab is all risk, no benefit. So parents have got to wake up and do their duty as a parent to protect. You know, I feel like if adults want to make poor decisions, that's on them, right? If you're an adult, if you want to take that jab and you find out later it was the stupidest thing you could possibly have done, well, at least you're an adult. We're allowed to make stupid decisions. We ride motorcycles without helmets, smoke cigarettes, eat too much, do a lot of dangerous things. That's on the adults. But for kids, come on, parents, we've got to protect.
What a message. And it's coming from the right person. Let's go back over your credentials. You're working with children day in, day out. You've had over 15,000 children go through your clinic.
Well, that's 15,000 active patients at any given time.
Wow.
I have hundreds of thousands of patients go through my clinic over 30 years as a pediatrician. I was Dartmouth trained, got my pediatric residency in California, board certified for 30 years, and I published the book, The Vaccine Friendly Plan, in 2016, peer-reviewed based information to say, hey, there might be a different way that would be safer, because the CDC schedule has never been tested against any other schedule or against no vaccines at all. And so we've got to get back to real data and science if we're going to do vaccines at all, because there's clearly risk and the benefit is marginal in many cases. So where's that analysis? My book, The Vaccine Friendly Plan, was my first attempt in 2016. That put the target on me. The medical board does not like to be, the CDC schedule and the powers that be don't want to be challenged. They're cash cow. Vaccines are probably the number 3 moneymaker, and they trigger more autoimmunity than anything else. Schoenfeld out of Israel published a whole book, Vaccines and Autoimmunity.
An important book.
Very important book. The immunosuppressants that we doctors use to treat autoimmunity, number 1 moneymaker in the world. What happens when you suppress the immune system? Cancer, infections, number 2 moneymaker in the world, all triggered by what? Vaccines primarily, not only. I mean, we have a very toxic environment that's part of the problem, but vaccines are a big piece of this puzzle. We have to scrap the whole thing and get back to, okay, what's going on and what's going to be right and the healthy way to move forward and put health and wellness at the forefront, so we're not just practicing medicine the old school way, diagnose and treat, sort of defensive medicine, instead of just let's get back to wellness and health. Believe it or not, the natural immune system that we're born with, that innate immune system, is powerful and effective, especially against COVID.
Wow. And that's really the center of this fight. It's like God versus man.
Almost.
Right?
It feels like it. It feels like it. So I was raised in the church. I'm a son of a missionary to Africa. So those are my roots. And when I went into medicine, I sort of rejected, not really purposely rejecting, but just sort of I slipped away from anything that had to do with spirituality or God. I'm science, right? Oh, and science is king. And you hear it in the news. We follow the science, we follow the data. But what people don't realize when they hear that is the news is a arm of pharma in their messaging. They're owned, bought and paid for. I think the movie Vax sort of made that clear, with the whistleblower William Thompson coming out from the CDC and going, whoa, we had the data showing the vaccines are causing problems and we scrapped it. So we've known for a long time. But COVID brings it to a whole new level. I mean, the amount of damage that's being caused. I've already had a child hospitalized with myocarditis who got the vaccine at a pharmacy. I mean, I've never seen a case of myocarditis my entire career, till one of my kids happens to go get this vaccine on their own. And this is what they're doing, direct marketing to consumers, even to kids. It's on Sesame Street. Get your vaccine. It's on the billboards. I interviewed a person this past week. I'm going to put it on my show. DoctorsInScience.com is the website for my show. Against the Wind, Doctors in Science, Under Fire. I started that show when they yanked my license. Actually, let me update your viewers on how that happened. February of 2019, the medical board came and said, prove that the vaccine friendly plan is as safe as the CDC schedule. So that's crazy. The CDC schedule's never been proven to be safe. Okay, let's try. I hired an independent expert come, got every single data of every patient born into my practice, the whole 10 years I'd been open, and we compared unvaccinated to vaccinated, age matched them, and what we found was for every single thing we looked at, whether it was ADD, ADHD, behavior problems, allergies, infections, it didn't matter what we looked at, the vaccinated had much higher rates. It just kept going up the longer we looked. Almost flatline, no health issues for the unvaxxed. This was like a...
And was that completely unvaxxed or moderately vaxxed?
Completely unvaxxed.
So it was unvaccinated completely with no shots?
None at all.
Versus...
partially vaccinated, actually.
Wow.
It was the vaccine-friendly plan, patients in my practice, because I think I have 1 or 2 out of 10,000 who want the CDC schedule. once informed, most people can see, for example, that giving your newborn baby a hepatitis B vaccine when the birth mother does not have hepatitis B makes no sense, since you catch it from sex and IV drug use. So pretty much everybody declines hepatitis B, at least till you're a teenager. So that's why, I mean, you know, it was the partially vaccinated against the unvaxxed, and even in that, the unvaxxed were so much healthier, like incredibly healthier. Wow. It caused me to think, well, first of all, I've always known the vaccine-friendly plan. If you're watching this and you're thinking this was the greatest book, well, it was a good book in the sense that it opened a lot of people's eyes to start questioning vaccines, but it's not safe. It's not safe, because look at the data. Wow. The unvaxxed are completely healthy compared to vaccine-friendly, which is sort of less than half the vaccines of a CDC vaccinated child.
It sounds like you have mixed feelings on your past work.
Definitely. You got to realize we aren't all born or raised to understand that vaccines have problems. A lot of us were indoctrinated from little kids through the public school system, or in my case, through medical school, all the way through medical school. Vaccines are safe and effective. That's the message we're told. Yeah. And unless you somehow can question that, so that's what I started doing around 2000. So 20 years ago, I started questioning it because I'm seeing more and more kids unhealthy. I'm seeing things I never saw as a child. Autism, ADD, all this rise of eczema and diabetes, insulin-dependent diabetes. I knew nobody growing up who had any of those conditions. None of them. We all had measles, mumps, rubella, and chickenpox. That was it. And we were healthy. So what was going on? What's causing it? Nobody seems to know. As I have an inquisitive mind, I sort of start looking into this, and you start realizing, oh my Lord, there is a lot of data about the problems with aluminum, problems of other toxins, problems with immune activation from vaccines being given too soon, too many too soon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There just weren't any studies comparing vaxxed to unvaxxed. I'm now going around the country speaking about not just my own data, but several other studies that are saying the exact same thing. It's interesting, when you look, you find the same thing.
Wow. It's very eye-opening. It brings up so many questions as to why was this ever done in this way? We'd always been under this guise that we had to have these childhood vaccines to prevent people from disease. But because there hasn't been the vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies to even prove the vaccines originally, even in the clinical trials, they're never done. It's a vaccine versus another vaccine, or a vaccine versus something. Like injecting something into you that is going to have a worse outcome than the vaccine that they're testing, so that the outcome always is rigged in favor of the vaccine. Things like this, to me, make it so shocking that it appears to me that it was never designed to help children be well. It was designed, like what Dr. Schoenfield's work was showing, that once you start the autoimmune process in the body, then you are a lifelong customer of Big Pharma. It appears that that was the reason, and when a child gets a Hep B shot on day one, you don't even have a reference point to say my child was different, because the very first day that the child was in the world, you only have that day as your reference point, and they were jabbed before you even got to see their face properly.
Right. There's only one thing worse than that.
What?
They introduced vaccines in pregnancy.
Yeah, wow.
So when they moved the Hep B from teenagers to newborns, and that was done around 2000, 2001. I mean, in some states earlier, but across the board in the US, it was around 2000, 2001. It was the same year they took mercury out of most of the vaccines. And I remember when they were taking the thimerosal out of the vaccines, I thought, all right, problem solved. All the neurodevelopmental problems are gonna go away, because we knew mercury was so dangerous. But we moved another dangerous compound, the high dose aluminum in the Hep B, right into the newborn period. So I think we just traded one toxin for another, and the devastation just went on and on and on.
Wow.
Yeah. As to, was this all planned intentionally? It's something to ponder, isn't it? I mean, it's just, doesn't make any sense why you would make certain decisions the way they're making them. And certainly, the fact that what we have for science is basically tobacco science. You smoke a pack a day, I'm gonna smoke none. We'll see who dies in the next week. Oh, neither of us died, cigarettes are safe. That's what they do with vaccine science. That's what they did for the hepatitis B. I think it was a week-long trial.
Dr. Brian Ardis, it is such a privilege to be with you. I have really enjoyed connecting with you and observing and learning from the material that you've been producing. Super eye-opening, and the passion that you comes from a place of real conviction. This has affected you. This has come into your home, your family, things and people that matter to you. And so I appreciate you standing rather than just kind of dealing with your own problems and your own pain. Instead, you've taken this fight to the world to save lives. And right now, our children are on the chopping block more than anyone else, and they're the most defenseless. And I know how passionate you are about children, and this goes back a long ways for you to do that work and be a voice for those that are not able to voice their own opinions in a way that will persuade anyone. And they're victims of, and have been, of junk science. And now it's really coming to the fore, and the world are becoming more aware, but this has been a long time fight for people such as yourself. So thank you so much for the work that you've been doing, and thank you for taking the time today.
You're very welcome. I won't stop.
Good. Why won't you stop?
Well, number one, I got 5 kids, and you're right about the kids being on a chopping block right now. There's just some things that are super disturbing, and there's a ton of junk science and censored science that I just have very little tolerance for, especially when you're going to put kids' lives physically in harm's way. Number one, I just love giving people relevant info that they should look at and go, oh, maybe there is a problem here. So just the fact that the FDA on October 26th of 2020 says, we don't have any data about myocarditis or heart inflammation in children ages 5 to 11 years old in the United States with vaccines because we haven't given any. Just because they say we don't have any data there. So in order to get that data, we just have to start putting vaccines into this age group and see what happens. That's what they said. When we already know from the CDC's own documents in August of this year, 2021, that myocarditis was actually occurring and being observed in 7 days post receiving the second Pfizer shot for all teenage age groups. In girls, teenagers, it was occurring 5 times more often than they expected it to in teenage girls. Myocarditis within 7 days. This was known in August. But for teenage boys, it was 20 times the amount of myocarditis or heart inflammation that they observed than what they expected to see in that same teenage age group for boys. This is the only data they had, the closest data they had to the age group for the 5 to 11-year-olds. And with that information, they said, we don't know how this is going to affect kids. We're just going to have to start pumping it into them. Only to find out that was October 26th. Fast forward, not even 2 weeks later, November 8th of 2021, the American Heart Association publishes an abstract in their journal called Circulation, and read the very last sentence. The American Heart Association, whose entire job is to research and give protocols to help reverse and protect all Americans from developing heart disease. And what did they find? It actually states from the American Heart Association, November 8th, 2021, their Circulation Journal. All mRNA vaccines dramatically increase inflammation of heart muscle, leading to thrombotic episodes, which is blood clotting disorders, cardiomyopathy, which is heart muscle disease, heart disease, and other vascular events following the vaccinations. And other vascular events would be strokes and heart attacks. So if the American Heart Association can come out just less than 2 weeks later and say the mRNA vaccines dramatically increase heart inflammation and lead to cardiovascular events, my problem with that is, if the American Heart Association can put that out, why wasn't that information related 2 weeks earlier to the FDA before they made this statement? They already had this information. They got it from the CDC. I don't know if you know this, but myocarditis, which is what heart inflammation is, which the American Heart Association is identifying, did you know that Dr. Hinton of the NHS in the UK has already given the statistics for the world so they can understand what the fatality rate is every single age group that's identified and diagnosed with myocarditis? For every age group worldwide, within 2 years, 20% of all those people will die. And we've got information about teenagers. We even have the numbers from American teenagers that have received the Pfizer shot, which is an mRNA shot, that the American Heart Association says causes heart inflammation. This heart inflammation called myocarditis is fatal in 2 years to 20% of everyone that actually gets diagnosed with that condition. In 5 years, the fatality rate per Dr. Hinton is 50% of all people will be dead. That means on the data sheets from the CDC when they reported in August that there were hundreds of teenage boys developing myocarditis, ages 12 to 19 years old. That means of the 12-year-olds, half of them won't even make it to their 17 years old. They'll be dead from myocarditis. I have a problem now, actually, the FDA coming out with the information from the CDC in August, coming out 2 months later in October saying we're now going to inject these experimental mRNA shots that now the American Heart Association says that it is dramatically increasing heart inflammation called myocarditis. I have a problem with the FDA not retracting this mandate or this extension of the emergency use authorization on the 28 million kids that they just allowed this EUA to be extended to put all these vaccines into 5 to 11-year-old children in America, knowing that heart disease is going up in teenagers where it never existed before. It's extremely rare in teenagers. But after these shots within 7 days, they're seeing it in teenagers. 5 times in females what they expected to see just within 1 week of the second Pfizer shot, and 20 times in teenage boys within the same time period. Just within 7 days. I have a problem with that, and I have a grave concern that there's going to be a whole lot of children that are going to be killed from these shots. And I have federal health agencies like the FDA, the CDC, who obviously, it appears, doesn't give a crap about what happens to these children. We're just going to go ahead and experiment on them and see what happens. No, I have a problem with that. I got 5 kids, and I wouldn't allow anybody to inject my kids with an experiment that is now being published, is known to cause myocarditis. And if you don't believe me, you don't have to believe me. Go talk to Peter McCullough, the most authored, published cardiologist in history. Go ask him his concerns about heart disease and these mRNA vaccines. He's got the same concerns around the safety around these shots, and he doesn't believe they're safe from all the data he's seen. And he's an epidemiologist. That means he studies the effects of infections that are actually affecting millions of people around the world. That's what his job is. He's been doing that for like 30 years, working directly with the NIH, and he has concerns. He shares the same concerns I do, and I'm not alone. But I have wanted to nonstop. That October 26, 2021 date was the most upsetting to me, is that's when the FDA said we're going to extend the emergency use authorization of these shots to all 5 to 11-year-old children, and they just chose Pfizer as the only shot, which is an mRNA shot. I actually didn't know I could get more upset than I was since May of 2020. I didn't realize just how grand and how evil this murderous plot was to actually injure, maim, disease, and kill innocent Americans and humans around the world. And people have nonstop told me, I cannot believe you. I cannot believe how great it's been to have you convey information. You've made a dramatic impact on saving lives around America and around the world. But I will leave events and they'll go, you're a great American, Dr. Ardis. And I'll go, no, I'm not. That's not how I see this. I'm trying to save every human being on the planet, and never have I considered myself a humanitarian, but that's the first thing that comes to mind. Someone's got to defend the innocent who are absolutely being taken advantage of, being lied to, being misguided, and then being maimed and killed with these drug treatments for COVID-19 in hospitals. Now with these vaccines being actually promoted to you as the cure to stop this pandemic, which they are not even designed to do. So yeah, I have a problem with everyone being lied to.
Thank you, Dr. Ardis. I appreciate that. Thank you for your stand. And we need people like yourself that are operating from that place of you're in touch with your heart, and you're in touch with your head, and a lot of people lost their minds and their hearts, right? It's like both. You see that issue where we are not observing science correctly. It's like more cult-like, where you just listen to certain people even though they don't have your interest at heart, and then they're also not operating out of a place of integrity and And that's really sad, and we just invite people to come into that place of step into your heart and use your mind, the God-given mind that you have, to use it to analyze these things just like you would anything else in life, like the decisions that people made with their spouse, who they chose in life. They were careful with that choice. They were careful with even the coffee maker that they purchased. We need to be so careful with this choice more than anything else if we're going to put it into our children.
August 2021, the CDC compiled a list of myocarditis diagnosed teenagers and adults after the second Pfizer-BioNTech shot. And you'll see it here. This is the actual chart. The CDC logo's on there. And if you just look at the red data points and numbers, as you notice, as ages get younger, the actual episodes of myocarditis go up. Myocarditis means, myo means muscle, cardia means heart, itis means inflammation of. Within 7 days of the second shot from Pfizer, these are the numbers of observed myocarditis, inflammation of heart muscle. This is dated August 18th, 2021. The FDA voted on October 26th, 2 months later, on whether or not to give these shots, Pfizer shots, these same shots, to children 5 to 11 years old. And they didn't find anything disturbing from this data. I do. Myocarditis, defined by Dr. Hinton out of the UK, says that for all age groups, anyone diagnosed with myocarditis, all of these teenagers on this chart were diagnosed within 7 days with myocarditis. Dr. Hinton in the UK says that myocarditis is fatal in 20% of all people with myocarditis, no matter what your age is, within 2 years. 20% of all these teenagers on this chart will be dead in 2 years. In 5 years, the fatality rate for myocarditis is 50%. That means for these 12-year-olds in this study, in this report, these 12-year-olds, 50% of them will be dead in 5 years because of the adverse side effect of myocarditis in these shots. Now, is myocarditis a side effect of these shots? Yes, it's actually listed on the Pfizer and Moderna's fact sheets that the FDA publishes right now. This is December of 2021. It's listed myocarditis, inflammation of heart muscle, is a side effect of the Pfizer and Moderna shot. Did the FDA know that myocarditis was going to be a side effect of the shots? In their October 22nd, 2020 report, it's listed second from the bottom. Myocarditis is an expected side effect of these shots. When are we going to pull the plug on this? No, the FDA decided on October 26th that even with this data, we're just going to have to start injecting all 5 to 11-year-old children and just see what happens. That's actually what they said. I am not okay with that. Now, what is the disease processes of even heart inflammation called myocarditis? What is it that the virus does and the spike protein on the virus and the vaccine? What do they do to cause disease? All diseases, 100% of them, are initiated by a process of damaging the cell in your body, in any tissue. And when you damage that cell, you damage it with what's called oxidative stress. And here's a study from October 2020 that defines that the virus SARS-CoV-2, that its disease process called pathogenesis is related to oxidative stress. Well, we know that. What about the spike protein? Sure enough, the spike protein, per this report, actually showed us that the spike protein, this is in May to June of 2021, the spike protein also causes oxidative stress, which means you damage the cell and allow the flood of electrons into it to allow the disease process to start. I put together on my site, thedrartistshow.com, I put together months ago a disease prevention protocol that actually is 4 nutrients proven to protect every cell in the body from what's called oxidative stress, regardless if it's spike protein, virus, bacteria, a toxic poison, radiation, it doesn't matter. All toxins and pathogens or viruses and bacteria, they cause damage to the cell called oxidative stress. I put together this protocol and it lives on my site on the resources page of thedrartistshow.com. 4 nutrients proven at specific dosages for children, teenagers, and adults that will best protect your body's organs from the trauma designed by the spike proteins, by any virus, and by the mRNA and other chemicals in the COVID-19 shots. This is designed for the vaxxed and the unvaxxed, and everyone should be doing it. I'll give you a brief update of what it is. There's 4 nutrients in there proven to protect all cells from oxidative stress. It is 1, vitamin C at a minimum of 5,000 milligrams a day, magnesium at 500 milligrams a day minimum, Number 3 is selenium at 200 micrograms, and the 4th is apopectin at 700 milligrams twice a day. All the research studies backing those doses is also in this protocol. You can download that for free. That is my concerns. Always early treatment is best. If you want to know what the blessing and the miraculousness behind early treatment, zinc has to be the thing you consider the most. Dr. Zev Zelenko has said from the beginning of this pandemic, zinc inside the cells stops replications of all coronaviruses, and he's right, including all viruses, influenza, it doesn't matter what it is, even coronaviruses. Ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine are effective early treatments. They are the best options, period. One of the greatest side benefits of those drugs is they push zinc and hold zinc inside your cells so that if a virus happens to get inside that cell, a virus cannot replicate in the presence of zinc. Everyone should be supplementing in the world 50 to 100 milligrams of zinc, I believe, every day for life to protect you from all of these infections. Early treatment is best. Do not wait until you're really sick. If you're going to go to the hospital, remember this site. There's forms you should have at home for the rest of your life, as far as I'm concerned, because I don't see an end yet to this onslaught of medical tyranny and political tyranny. Your liberties and lives are being destroyed, being taken advantage of, and it appears that many men and organizations in the world do not care about preserving the lives of adults. Our elderly are being targeted with remdesivir and with the vaccines, and now they're coming after our children.
Many of our expert doctors have emphasized the concerns on the side effects of childhood vaccines. One of these experts is Dr. Andrew Wakefield, and he discusses the danger of one vaccine, in particular, the MMR vaccine, and how he experienced firsthand its ability to cause autism. If a vaccine that took 2 years to create can still cause such severe effects, then the COVID vaccine, which was created in under a year, should be a serious concern. Dr. Paul Thomas returns next as he talks about how none of his pediatric patients got severely ill with COVID and none of them needed to be hospitalized. So he begs the question, why would we inject a gene-altering, possibly fatal, high risk of side effect shot when there's no risk from the disease for which you're injecting? It simply makes no sense, so there has to be an agenda. One thing that we haven't discussed is the MMR shot and your investigation into that issue. You obviously had questioned the holy grail of vaccines, and this caused such a big ripple effect. I mean, as far as I know, there weren't many people that were in the mainstream that had questioned it publicly in the setting that you had, that it caused such an uproar. There were people, and this has been a long time battle. You're probably more aware than I am of the history of vaccines in America. They go back a couple hundred years here, and even mandatory vaccines. Very shocking, the history of kind of how the American public and people around the world have been bullied into taking vaccines. But you know, what happened back then? What was your big questions around the vaccines, and how was that reacted to, and then furthermore, how is what you were the questions that you were asking, how have they really come to the fore with the COVID-19 shots? Because it seems like the same principles have been there, because they keep getting ignored. Now it's kind of finally come to the public where they're saying, well, hold on, maybe the vaccines aren't safe in general, and maybe the safety studies aren't there, and so forth. So yeah, I'd love to hear what your experience was, and how that relates to now.
Okay. Well, my work in vaccines, firstly, I was a sort of 6th generation doctor at St Mary's Hospital in London, and I was entirely mainstream. I trained as a surgeon. I became a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons, a fellow of the Royal College of Pathologists. I published 150 scientific papers. I ran a big research team at the Royal Free Hospital, and I was entirely mainstream. My topic of interest, my area of interest, was inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. I was a gastroenterologist, effectively. And so in May of 1995, a mother called me and said my child was absolutely fine. And then they had their MMR vaccine. I wasn't anti-vaccine. I took him to be vaccinated on time, according to the doctor's instructions. And he had a catastrophic regression within a very short space of time after the vaccine, lost all of his skills, his interaction, his socialization with his siblings, his speech, language, everything was gone. He was floppy, his muscle tone had gone, he'd stopped sleeping, he was screaming, he was inconsolable, and he was eventually diagnosed with autism. And I said, I don't know anything about autism. I said, I'm a gastroenterologist, and when I was at medical school, it was so rare, autism, we weren't even taught about it. Why? And she said, doctor, the reason I'm calling you is because he has terrible gastrointestinal problems, and no one will take them seriously. The doctors and nurses I tell say, that's just autism, get over it. You know, put him in a home, forget about him, move on, have another baby. That was the attitude. And I was appalled by that, because what they were describing to me is a child who was failing to thrive, who was having diarrhea 10, 12 times a day, who was clearly in pain, even though they'd lost the ability to communicate. The mothers knew that they were in pain, that their appetite had changed, that their diet had changed, that they were clearly suffering from some physical ailment, and no one would take that seriously. So I put together, it was an entirely plausible story. And what you need to understand as a doctor is that your principal duty is to the patient or the patient's parents, and to listen to what they're telling you, because therein lies the clue to their child's problem. And so all I did was listen, and then I put together a team of experts, and we investigated these children, and the parents were absolutely right. The children had an inflammatory bowel disease, and when we treated that with medication that we would use for Crohn's disease and with dietary intervention, what we found was dramatic improvement. Now, here was a disease that we had been told as physicians, as medical students, was untreatable. There's nothing you could do about it, forget about it. That was a complete and utter lie. Just by listening to the parents, we'd not only identified the fact that there was a bowel disease, but it was treatable, and that impacted their autism. And the children started coming back. They started laughing and smiling and interacting and sleeping and doing all the things, the skills that they'd lost years ago were coming back. We didn't cure autism, but we made a huge difference to that child's well-being. So here we were in a situation where the medical profession had said one thing, the parents had said another thing, and the parents were right on every count. The medical profession was completely wrong. It was wrapped up in its own dogma, its own fantasy world, its own lie, and it was wrong. So when people said the MMR vaccine is safe and effective, and this is nothing to do with the MMR, this is coincidental, then you listen to that, and then you listen to the parent, and you say, I'm going to investigate this to the best of my ability, because so far you've been right and you've been wrong. And that's what I did. And the dean of the medical school said, if you pursue this vaccine safety research, it will not be good for your career. And in that, at least he was completely right. It did change my career. And so I did. I pursued it. My colleagues didn't want to do it. They said, you know, Andy, as pediatricians, we cannot be seen to question the safety of MMR vaccine. I said, what does that mean? That isn't a medical perception. That's not a scientific perception. That's not putting the patient first. It's putting your respectability with your colleagues at the Royal College first. You know, we cannot be seen to question the safety. And so, to make a very long story short, we published a paper which told the parents' story and suggested that further work needed to be done to clarify whether or not MMR vaccine was involved. We didn't say it was the cause. We couldn't. We said, this is the story that we've been told. This is what we think should be done to investigate it. Okay, and that caused mayhem. absolute mayhem, questioning MMR vaccine safety, and the heavens opened. But I went to testify before the U.S. Congress in 2001, and I met with the CDC at the time, and they said, okay, you say that MMR may be a cause of autism, but every child gets MMR and only a few get autism, so why? I said, well, it's a very good question. What we believe is that it is the pattern of exposure. For example, children who get the vaccine younger may be at greater risk because intuitively their immune system is not so developed as it is when they're older. And we know this because when you get natural measles, if you get it under the age of 1, the chances of a severe outcome are much greater than if you get it over 1. So age of exposure is extremely important. So they said, okay, and they went away and they tested that hypothesis. And they found that it was exactly right. That children who got the MMR vaccine younger, on the CDC schedule between 12 and 18 months, were at much greater risk of getting autism following that vaccine than if they got the vaccine later, for example, after 24 or 36 months. They'd proven that what we thought was correct. They'd proven what the parents said was correct. What did they do with that information? They destroyed it. They corrupted it. They took all of those documents and they shredded them, and they published something completely to the contrary. MMR vaccine was safe and there was no link with autism. And years later, as you'll know from your interview with Brian Hooker, Dr. William Thompson, who was the lead scientist on that study, who had designed the study, collected the data, analyzed the data, came forward and said, I can no longer live with this. We lied, we did a terrible thing, and here's the evidence. And that was the basis of the film Vaxxed.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that had a tremendous effect and ripple effect throughout the world and in America. And so I really appreciate that work that you did with that film and bringing that story to the fore, because it's one area, but that one area is critical, because if we can state our case, we have a stake in the ground, and that is a place from which we can advance from. And this wrestle had gone on for so long in regard to the MMR shot and you being vilified versus your research being validated and praised. And then as a result, there's this holding pattern. And then when you stack in the issue of the public not even being aware, so whatever war was won or lost, the public are not even aware, so the importance of the film then became critical, and I appreciate that so much. Is the vaccine schedule all about making us sick? I got a domain a couple of years ago, sickconspiracy.com, which is just the idea, the fact that this has been a conspiracy to make us sick. And that's what I think. But I don't know, what do you think?
So I grew up in that world, right, medicine, mainstream medicine, where vaccines are presented as saving the world. And they use the illustrations of smallpox and polio. They always go back to those. And if you actually look at the history of what happened with those, that wasn't what happened. Not at all. Polio is the one that I lived through in a sense. So I remember, it was more than 10 years ago, reading this article out of India. They had just had a big outbreak of polio in India. And the World Health Organization went in and did this massive vaccination campaign, the entire country of India, however many billions and billions of people that is, right? And the next year there was 0 polio. They eradicated polio, and it was in the news how wonderful this was. Well, what this article pointed out was the year before the campaign, there were 50,000 cases of polio. The following year, there were 0 cases of polio, but 53,000 cases of non-polio paralytic disease. They changed the definition. And they've done this over and over again, tweak the definitions so that you get the results you want. They've done this with COVID. So what they did with COVID is you are not vaxxed until 2 weeks after your second booster. So in the case of the Pfizer, that could be 5 or 6 weeks after you got your first vaccine. All of that time, you're still considered unvaxxed. And what that does is, we have the data on all the deaths and severe side effects. They happen in the first few days, mostly. They certainly happen in the first couple weeks. every vaccine injury, therefore, almost every vaccine injury, gets labeled a unvaxxed COVID event. And so they're just stacking the data. Of course, they've got the PCR game where they've got the cycles of amplification so high that we have almost all false positives. We have a case-demic, not a pandemic. Most of the positives don't mean anything. And then they played the game, the CDC did, of if it's going to be an infection in someone who's already vaccinated, you can't count it unless the cycle count is, 18 or less? Or 28 and less, I think. Yeah, 28 and less. So, I mean, they're not comparing apples to apples. So it's just playing games with numbers. But the reality, I'm just a boots on the ground, in the trenches pediatrician, busy seeing lots and lots of kids. Kids don't get sick from COVID. Yeah. They just don't. I mean, sure, you'll hear reports on the news, and mostly there's some child who has unfortunate underlying severe health problems, and then any little infection is going to tip them over. That makes the news. Or it's death with COVID, not death from COVID, but they don't make that distinction. How else could you explain 10,000 kids, not one ends up in the hospital in my practice? COVID's no big deal. Why would we inject a gene-altering, possibly fatal, high risk of side effect shot when there's no risk from the disease for which you're injecting? It simply makes no sense. So there has to be an agenda. Understanding what that agenda is it just money or is it something worse than that? Well, if you do enough reading, plandemic and the various theories that are out there, but some of it's just laid out on the internet. There are powerful interests that want to control the world. Through, I think, implementing a passport where you have to get the jab in order ultimately to travel, to partake in society, to go to ball games or restaurants. I mean, this is worse than apartheid. This is slavery. So we are actually on the verge of going into a new form of digital slavery, and that worries me greatly. As a parent, why would I do that to my kid? I mean, if you want to enslave yourself, I would encourage you not to, but that's on you. But your kids, I'm a pediatrician. So I would just beg of you, if you're watching this and you're a parent, whatever you can, do not give up. You need to draw a line in the sand and say, not my kids. If that means you've got to homeschool, you homeschool. If it means you've got to leave the state you're in, leave the state you're in. That sounds drastic. I have 9 kids, 8 of them live near me in Oregon. I hope I don't have to move. If my kids watch this interview and hear this, they go, Dad's thinking about moving. I don't know, but we have to stand for freedom.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much, and thank you for encouraging parents to stand their ground, to understand the nature of what's happening now. You've had to put your money where your mouth is. This has cost you greatly to speak on these subjects. You would have a much easier, more wealthy life if...
Oh my goodness, yes. Yeah, that's, people will sometimes say, oh, he's just in it for the money. I'm like, what money? I didn't make a penny last year, 0, from my practice. I mean, thankfully I had a couple other income streams, not substantial, but enough to survive. But no, I can't turn my back on my kids, meaning my patients, right? I mean, they come to me for the honest truth and the best information that I can give them. How could I say, well, this is what I'm going to do for me, but you're going to have to go get that, gene-altering, possibly life-destroying shot. Can't do it.
You couldn't live with yourself.
I couldn't live with myself, and I can't live with being quiet either. Just shut up and turn an eye, right? I mean, that's being part of the problem. Wow. So what happened was, after they asked me to present prove that the vaccine-friendly plan was as safe as the CDC schedule, I actually hired an independent expert come in. They got all the data. We published it 5 days after it was published in an international peer-reviewed journal. They yanked my license. So that was December 3rd, 2020. June 3rd, 2021, I got it back with some restrictions. The restrictions are amusing. I'm not allowed to see well children. Well, why not? Well, because I might talk them out of vaccines, I guess, is what they're worried about. I'm not allowed to talk about vaccines, and I'm not allowed to do research. Why would you not want a doctor to do research, to get data out to the world that would be valuable? It's probably because I'm sitting on one of the largest groups of unvaccinated patients in the country. And the reason that's happened is the climate in Portland, Oregon, where I practice. Most of the other practices discharge families who don't follow the CDC schedule. So they say it's this way or the highway. That's coercion, by the way. That's not medicine. That's certainly not practicing informed consent. But it has the side effect of those patients come to my practice because they know we honor informed consent. If you want vaccines, we've got them. If you don't want them, fine. We have a discussion and the parents get to decide. That's how it should be. But it's resulted in this unusual gathering, if you will, of these incredibly healthy people. And so other doctors don't see that because they've sent those people away. So I get to see something unique. How can I be quiet about that? The world needs to hear that the unvaccinated kids are the healthiest kids on earth. Unbelievably so. It's exciting. I mean, I get excited. So whereas I used to get excited to say, here, you need to get these vaccines, this is going to keep you safe. Now it's like, no, it's not. Okay. And in fact, the vaccine friendly plan is not going to keep you safe either. So I do need to rewrite that book. I've approached my co-author and my publisher. It's not looking like it's going to be possible. Probably politics again. So I'll just have to write another book and keep talking to people like you. Let people know that the safest thing you can do right now and the way the world's going is just stop. No more. Just say no more and build up your natural immune system. It is the most powerful thing you can do.
Wow. Yeah. Something has happened between the last time we spoke because you were speaking more emphatically about the things that we just spoke about just then.
It's a journey. They took my license. I got it back in part. I've been told, as most doctors who run up against medical boards are told, to be quiet. I can't do it. So I'm no longer in this because I have to save my career. I'm in this because we've got to save the kids. And I don't save the kids by being quiet or sitting on this information that I have that is so powerful. I mean, it's absolutely powerful. These boards that are taking away good doctors' licenses, these businesses that are, letting go of employees because they don't want the vaccine, which, by the way, your viewers probably know this, but the decision was just made that, businesses don't have the right to kick you out if you're not vaccinated or if you don't want a mask. So thankfully that went through, I think, the Supreme Court. So there's hope on the horizons. No, specifically my attorney said to fight the board. Actually, my trial just got postponed. It was supposed to be this week, in fact. Got postponed to November. So I will have my day in court about 2 years after they took my license. That's enough time, I'm thinking they're thinking, to build a bigger case, maybe to destroy his career, right? Maybe he'll just go away. They use all these various tactics, I think, to try to destroy people who have information they don't want. But when my attorney says you're going to need about $250,000 just to get through the first trial and about $1 million to get through the appeal process that's going to go on. So I've started a fundraiser. It's called Dr. Paul's Fight. Cool. drpaulsfight.com. And what I like about this fundraiser is there's an option to pray. Not everybody has money. I realize times are tough out there. So if you don't have money, that's okay. Just join us, prayer, share, and if you can support the fight, that'd be awesome.
That's awesome. Well, I'm going to support the fight.
Thank you.
I'll donate, absolutely. Thank you. You're welcome, and thank you for this work. It's critical, and we need to get behind people such as yourself that are putting your necks out. And it's kind of like if you were in the military and someone says, cover me, or they just run out, and so they've just run out, so you know that you cover them, and if you don't, they're dead, and if you do the same, and we're all dead. Yeah. If we don't cover each other. So thank you for standing.
Oh, you're welcome. No, it's absolutely my role at this point for this place and time. That's why I'm here. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Why would I be given all these healthy, unvaxxed patients, accumulating in my practice, speaking the truth about what their lives are like, and giving me the ability to see that difference and then the ability to get the data. So it's an honor to play that role.
It's clear that these vaccines are extremely dangerous for children. Many of our experts are taking a stand against them because they're seeing firsthand the detrimental side effects that vaccinated children and teens are experiencing. Shortly after the vaccine rollout began, it became clear that it was causing serious and heartbreaking side effects in women, especially pregnant women, and women who are trying to conceive. Our next expert speaker, Dr. Jana Schmidt, talks about how she helped women to heal from the adverse effects of the COVID shot. We'll then go back to Dr. Brian Ardis, who expressed real concern about the deadly side effects that the vaccine is having on children and teens, one of those being myocarditis. Next up, he goes into detail about the proprietary ingredients that are found in the vaccines and how, due to the emergency use authorization of these vaccines, Big Pharma can constantly change these ingredients without FDA approval. He explains this is a real concern when it comes to the damage that this can cause to our bodies, and especially what it can do to children. Now, something controversial would be what people refer to as spike protein shedding, meaning that people being around people that are vaccinated are getting some of the effects or a lot of the effects, and then others debate maybe this is not actually really happening, but you think it is?
I do, and I didn't just rely on my sources either. I've spoken to many other doctors I trust and admire. Dr. Christiane Northrup and I had long conversations about this too. Dr. Judy Mikovits. There's many, and I've spoken to Dr. Tenpenny. Like, I wanted to know as many, I guess, case studies on this because it seemed, I didn't want it to be true, right? It seemed horrific. And many women coming to me that say, I've been menstruating for 30 days straight, and they couldn't figure out why. My dentist says I'm bruising all over, and I'm not sure why. Or people bleeding, their nose bleeds, ear bleeds. So I saw neurological and vascular issues going on, and I was very concerned, especially concerned for women trying to get pregnant and those who are newly pregnant. So I work a lot with fertility issues. A lot of people come to me that looking to have babies, and I love to help them, discover the right ways to do that, eliminating avenues of harm. And to me, that seemed like one of the avenues of harm. So in a real virus, they have spike proteins. They separate, they shoot out spike proteins, they keep going and going. And that would be a shedding. So if I had a virus that was multiplying and I coughed on you, then you might get it would be a shedding. But this isn't a true virus that these spike proteins are coming from. It's from the injection, right? So they've been manufactured to make your body think that you're fighting something, right? Constantly, nonstop. And we're still trying to discover if it wanes, if this transmission of spike protein from one person to another, or even within the people that have gotten the shot, like I really want to help them too, if it starts to wane over time. And I know Dr. Peter Malone is doing work on that.
Peter McCullough or Peter?
Oh, excuse me.
Robert Malone.
Robert Malone, yes.
The inventor?
Right. Has done some studies on that. And as I understand, it does wane, but it hasn't gone away completely. Yep. So, so we're trying to help people with that, and it does seem controversial because it seems a little like we've never seen anything like this before. So I have found that shikimic acid, which is an element in star anise, fennel, pine needles, actually helps to inhibit the attachment of spike proteins to our cells onto ACE2 receptors. So something simple as drinking a star anise tea actually has really made all the difference in the people that have come to me. So they're drinking this tea, they've stopped bleeding profusely, they've stopped bruising, their brain fog is clearing up. With pregnant women, we have to do some different things. We have to be very careful. I don't recommend pine for them, but something like dandelion extract has similar actions, and that's safe for pregnant women. So anyway, that's sort of where we're looking, and I'm learning more every day about it, but it's definitely a concern.
Question, Dr. Ardis. You mentioned in one of the videos that went viral of you about the proprietary ingredients in Moderna, and are there other shots that have proprietary ingredients? Do these shots change? Do you have evidence for that? How many proprietary ingredients were there and are there now?
Yeah, the first time I was exposed to this was Dr. Sherry Tenpenny out of Cleveland, Ohio. I was doing a Zoom call with her. She had done this entire presentation on 20 ways that the COVID-19 vaccines could cause disease or death. And in that actual presentation, she supported and was able to show that Moderna's shots alone, the first shots that came out on December 14th of 2020, they only had 2 trademarked or patented ingredients inside the shots at that time. By the time May came around, when we did this actual little event with her, which was on Mother's Day weekend, at that time there was already 7 patented ingredients that were in there, which means since the time of their release there had already been 5 more patented ingredients put into those shots that weren't there just 5 months earlier in December of 2014.
So I can make sure I got the verbiage right. So you're talking patented, not proprietary.
Patented.
Yeah. So proprietary means so they're open about it, but we don't know. Well, it's a new ingredient, or are we able to find out what these patented ingredients are?
No, you can look up the patented number, but they haven't had to disclose what the ingredients are during the emergency use authorization period.
So that's like proprietary.
Yep. So the emergency use authorization allows the actual vaccine makers to change the formulas the whole time those vaccines are being used. So Pfizer-BioNTech can actually manipulate their formula the whole time as long as it's under an emergency use authorization. So can Moderna, so can Johnson & Johnson. It's only if an FDA approval comes in or is placed on any of those vaccines or shots that they're no longer allowed to change ingredients or formulas without conducting and reapplying for approval from the FDA. And they have to do clinical trials, fund those, and then show proof that the change in the formulas actually were proven to be safe and effective also. And that costs them money. During this pandemic right now, they're calling it, there is no attempt. None of these companies want the emergency use authorization to stop. It allows them or to go away. They're not looking for an FDA approval. They're going to be allowed to actually create and change the lots and the ingredient doses in their vaccines as long as the emergency use authorization is in place. They just did it again, actually. So on October 26th, when the FDA said, Pfizer, you're allowed to give your Pfizer-BioNTech shots to all 5 to 11-year-old children, that same day, Pfizer submitted a 40-page document and said, we're going to change the ingredients in our Pfizer shots. We're going to take out one ingredient and add what's called a tris buffer. And they said if we change out these ingredients, we think maybe it will reduce some of the cardiovascular events being reported. Now, what's insane about that is there's some admittance to, or recognition at least of Pfizer, that maybe there is something to these cardiovascular events, enough that they're going to change the entire formula and give it to children. My problem with that is there is no formula with that tris buffer in a Pfizer-BioNTech shot that's gone into any human during this entire period. So you're going to add it in there, not do any trials on it, on children or adults. You're just going to now put a new ingredient in there and start injecting into all children ages 5 to 11. It's like every idea around safety, research data, clinical trials has just been thrown out of the window for this entire pandemic. And I'm not the only one disturbed or disgusted by that. There's a lot of us that have worries and concerns about that.
Wow.
You're talking about children.
Sure.
Why would you not want to prove this is safe and effective in animals first? Like, why would you not want to do that? At all, ever. I've heard a lot of talk around the Nuremberg Code. I've read all 10 points of the Nuremberg Code. And one of those points is we will never experiment on another human when we haven't given that same medication or experimental drug to an animal first and proven it safe and effective in clinical animal trials. They haven't done that with any of these. So they're breaking all of those internationally accepted codes to protect humanity against the Nuremberg trials ever happening again.
Now we'll turn to Del Bigtree, who talks about the unnecessary risk of vaccinating children against COVID. He talks about the side effects that we're seeing firsthand and the severity of these effects on children's lives and futures, and how children are being affected and almost sacrificed in order to protect the elderly. We'll end our episode with Dr. Paul Thomas. He adds to what Dr. Ardis is saying with regards to the serious and harmful effects of the vaccine for children. He also expresses concern about how it's affecting fertility and goes into detail about a study conducted that has shown that unvaccinated children are much healthier than vaccinated children.
We got myocarditis and pericarditis in our children, which is swelling of the heart being caused by this spike protein that's being injected in the vaccine. And the numbers that we're seeing out of Israel, you're 3 times to 6 times more likely as a boy being injected with this vaccine to develop myocarditis, a swelling of your heart that will be a permanent lifelong disability in your heart. Hopefully it doesn't kill you, even though we're told at about 10 years out, 50% of people with myocarditis die. So we have these children, and we know they're 3 to 6 times more likely to develop myocarditis than to end up in the hospital had they just gotten a natural COVID infection. So right there, when we look at the risk-reward benefit ratio, we can say unequivocally, and I've studied vaccines for some time now, I've never been able to tell you absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt, this vaccine is more dangerous to children between the ages of 0 and 18 than the virus is. I can tell you that. So now when the CDC and the FDA is approving it, I'm saying, why? When have we ever put our children in harm's way to protect the elderly? Those are the ones that are at risk, right? This is not a childhood illness. This is an elderly illness. This kills people that are usually over the age of 75, that have other comorbidities like cancer and COPD and diabetes and hypertension and heart disease. Those people that are already on their deathbeds, coronavirus, COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, depending on how you want to talk about it, it's bad. It's bad for those people. They're at a high risk. Children, 0. I mean, it's really a 0.
99.989.
99.9976% is the survival rate 0 to 18. 99.9976, 0.002 is their actual death rate. And you have to assume that that 0.002% is the ones that were already probably sickly.
Coming back to this COVID-19 shot for the children, you obviously think it's a huge issue. When it comes to adults taking the shot versus children, do you think it's worse for children or just the same or better for children for this shot versus either the elderly or whatever age group, middle-aged, my age? What do you think in regard to what's in store for the children at this point?
So this shot, the COVID-19 shot, is a disaster for everybody, regardless of your age. I think if you are in your late 80s, 90s, there's not that much life left, for autoimmunity to destroy and wreak havoc on you. So in that sense, maybe it's less dangerous the older you are, because you have fewer years for autoimmunity to raise its ugly head. We know autoimmunity can take years sometimes. Things like myocarditis, which is the inflammation around the heart and destruction of heart muscle, seems to be more prevalent in younger age groups. So maybe it is more dangerous for the young just on that issue alone. But the thought of giving this to children, anybody actually who's reproductive age or before. So let's just count everybody up to age 45. This spike protein that comes in this vaccine, or shot rather, has a propensity to concentrate in the gonads, so your ovaries and your testicles. And we have no data yet, but it's looking very worrisome for fertility. So you could foresee, if 90% of the population gets this and its effect on fertility is close to 100%, you've only got 10% of the population that can reproduce. This could be a disaster. On that alone, not to speak of the deaths and the multitude of system disorders that come from that shot. Yeah. No, it's pretty much almost all risk and no benefit.
Yeah. And some of the studies I looked at when it came to myocarditis, certainly boys were more affected than girls. This is just one particular issue. Yes. And there are many, so that doesn't mean it's better for girls, right? So there's more to that. And it did appear, some of the data, the younger you are, the more likely you are to have just this inflammation of the heart muscle, and this case, myocarditis, which Dr. Anthony Hinton said that in 5 years, 50% of people die from myocarditis.
Yeah, if that's true, and we don't know what percentage of those who get the shot will end up with myocarditis, because it can develop at any time. It's also likely that it's an autoimmune phenomenon, and those can develop over time. So, yeah, it's. I think I heard one speaker recently put it: you might survive and not have death be your outcome right away, but but you're going to have to look over your shoulder for the rest of your life if you take this jab.
True. True. So, okay, Dr. Thomas, let's talk about the findings of your study, vaccinated versus unvaccinated. Why don't you just reveal for camera what the big outcomes were there? How many children were in this group? How many years was it surveillanced for? Sure. And then what were the outcomes in terms of different disease, from whether it was asthma or, I mean, some of the cases, I know that ADHD was one. This is a very striking aspect of it. I want you to talk about that. Even autism was being assessed. So I'd like to hear what the outcomes. But tell me the parameters of the study, because this is probably your most famous work, right? This particular study that we're referencing.
Yeah.
And the most telling, because they're very uncommon. I know that, and I just interviewed with Dr. Brian Hooker, and we referenced your work when we were interviewing just recently, and he mentioned his new book that he's coming out with, which is Vax, Unvax, with Robert Kennedy Jr.
Yeah.
And they're referencing over 150 studies of vax versus unvax, but they're very much buried, and yours was boots on the ground in your own clinical practice. And one of the things that's also interesting is that you were surprised with the results, meaning that you didn't think the outcome was going to be what it was, I believe, at the time. So if you could break that down for us.
Sure. So this is a real-world vaxxed, unvaxxed study. We had over 500 unvaxxed patients and over 2,700 partially vaccinated, and we followed these patients for up to 10 and a half years. Basically, it's everybody born into my practice over the 10 and a half years that we were open. We age matched a vaccinated child to a unvaccinated child so that they were very equal in age. So we didn't have a discrepancy that was artificial due to the age of the child. And we looked at a number of clinical outcomes. Basically, we looked at all outcomes, how many office visits did a child have for every single condition, and then we present that data. The things that just jumped out that we looked at was for ADHD, for example, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Nobody gets diagnosed before age 4, so both lines are flat line. Remember, we're going for 10 years. And then around age 4 or 5, you see the vaccinated line just starts taking off all the way till the very end. It just gets higher and higher. There were no ADHD cases in the unvaxxed. That surprised me. I mean, growing up, I didn't know a single child with ADD or ADHD, so it shouldn't have surprised me. But somehow I just felt like, there must have been, we just didn't know what to call it back then because I was a hyper kid. But let's face it, I might have been high energy, but I could focus, I could learn. I actually probably, while you could meet the criteria, I probably did not have that medical condition. I'm just high energy, blessed with a lot of energy. So that's just one thing. Other behavioral disorders, the same thing. Almost none in the unvaxxed, just goes up and up and up in the vaccinated.
How many did you say was for the ADHD?
I didn't say actual numbers because we compared, for all these conditions, we're comparing age matched, those over 500 unvaxxed to over 500 vaxxed, who most closely matched up in age. Yeah.
Like, so, because I remember looking at a chart, and was it 800 to 0 or something like that in regard to ADHD to vaccinated versus unvaccinated?
Oh, that's possible out of the total number because there was 0 in the unvaxxed. If you started with, let me see if that makes sense. If you started with like 2,700 vaccinated, ADHD runs 10%. I don't know.
Yeah.
Hard to do the math on the run. I don't remember the chart you're talking about.
Sure, yeah.
Other conditions.
If it was around 10%, that would be around 300 or so.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Other conditions that were almost absent in the unvaccinated and highly prevalent and just going up and up and up over time in the vaccinated were all the allergy conditions, asthma, eczema, dermatitis, skin conditions, allergic rhinitis, which is the allergy nose, eye, itchy eye thing. And then we had things that go along developmental issues, developmental delays. Autism we didn't have enough numbers for that to plot out in a significant manner over time, but there was a signal of more autism in the vaccinated kids. But learning issues and developmental delays, certainly the same pattern, more and more over time in the vaccinated group. Another surprise was anemia. So there was almost no anemia in the unvaxxed, and at 9 months there was this massive spike in anemia in the vaccinated. Well, that makes sense. We screen for anemia at 9 months. And the interesting thing about that is my whole career, pediatricians are trained to screen for anemia at 9 months because anemia is associated with developmental delays. Well, there was no anemia, so to speak, in the unvaxxed, and this massive spike of anemia in the vaccinated. So are the vaccines causing a massive amount of anemia, which is part of why we have so much developmental delay in the vaccinated? It needs to be looked at. So this is the beauty of data. This is the beauty of science. When you find signals like this, we need to pay attention and get more data, not shut it down. So this is why I have the Pediatric Health Outcomes Initiative. We're enrolling babies and tracking their health for 10 to 18 years. That's something I've been doing for the last 4 years. We have 1,000 kids enrolled. We're going to try to expand this. I can't personally do this anymore due to the medical board putting that restriction on me, but there's a will to get more data and to really start exposing the truth to people. My data is backed up by all the other vaxxed, unvaxxed studies that when I travel around the country, I speak about. So even though that study was retracted, not a surprise, by the way. I don't know if you had heard that my study was retracted.
Yeah.
They're not challenging the data, they're challenging the methodology. And basically, we found a way to get more significance out of the data by looking at all visits. Instead of just a yes, no, you have asthma or you don't, we would say, oh, how many visits of asthma did you have? And a child who comes in 10 times a year for asthma has a more significant condition than a child who comes in once. And so it was a way of getting a handle on severity, and it made it more robust, the differences, and simply it's a new technique in analyzing data that should probably be used in all vaxxed, unvaxxed studies.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, and so it's unethical to do a study of vaccinated versus unvaccinated, according to what Dr. Hooker was sharing with me.
Right.
As to the reason why we don't do these studies. So CDC officially saying it's unethical for us to do these studies. It is implying that to allow some children not to be vaccinated, we're putting them at risk, so therefore those studies cannot exist.
Right. When the reality is the opposite. The vaccinated are the ones at the highest risk. So we now know the most ethical thing we should be doing is doing proper long-term prospective studies comparing the vax to unvax. But even if you just want to do it the way we did it, every single major health system has the data. They just need to look at it. I mean, you could take a Kaiser, which is a huge system, right? Or heck, the government agencies, and just pull the data and compare unvaxxed to matched vaccinated kids and look at all health outcomes.
Yeah.
The data's there. So anyway.
Oh, thank you. Is it true that on the 42nd day and the 6-month mark, just on a day here and a day there, is the only times when a child is being observed with their reactions to the vaccines, and instead of the 10 to 15 year rollout that we've all been told about, this is the actuality of what's happening when it comes to observing the children?
Well, it depends on, each vaccine has a separate design.
Yeah.
I mean, some are as short as a week and some might be a year or 2 or 3, but you mentioned earlier, and you were spot on, they almost never have a proper control. They don't use saline controls, they use other ingredients, usually the adjuvant that's in the vaccine, like aluminum, that's what's causing most of the problems anyway.
Yeah.
So it's
probably a higher dosage as well than what's in the shot they're testing, because
study design is the problem.
Yeah.
And so we lack good science. That's why I call it tobacco science. And we should just get back to proper science. But in the meantime, for parents, if you're watching, there's just one message. Enough, right? Stop the carnage. This is what I had, I had this right in the vaccine-friendly plan, and that is, if you start to see problems in your child, stop. Allow their body to heal, and most of the time it will. Unfortunately, most of my peers will just deny that there's any connection, just carry on hammering the vaccines in as they create more and more damage until they lose those kids, tip them over into severe autism or some other major chronic disease.
Amazing. Yeah. Dr. Thomas, thank you so much.
Thank you. And I hope your viewers will support me at drpaulsfight.com.
Awesome. Appreciate you. And yeah, and I do too. And I encourage people to support your work. Continue the fight.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Thomas, we're behind you. We believe in you. And we want you to know that there's armies of mothers and fathers and children that care about your work continuing and your voice being heard, because you are a voice for them. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, for exposing what the world needs. Appreciate you.
You're welcome. We're facing extraordinary times that have led to unthinkable outcomes. There is clear evidence to prove that the COVID vax is directly and seriously harming people, especially pregnant women and children. Our experts spoke out during this episode, uncovering the truth, advocating to the world to stand together and prevent our children from being harmed. It is clear that the vaccine is way more dangerous than the virus itself, and that if we don't intervene and protect pregnant women and children, in particular from this bioweapon, our future generations will suffer and will be affected in many ways, from a dramatic increase in myocarditis to high levels of infertility, stillbirths, and many unthinkable catastrophes. Many people believe that ignorance is bliss, but in reality, this is not something that will go away by complying with it or ignoring it. In fact, it'll get much worse. We need to stand up as a nation to protect our women and children from these dangerous bioweapons, and the first step is to educate ourselves and to be aware of what's really going on. Hi, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for joining me. Just a quick reminder to let you know that we will be closing this program down in just a matter of, it's really several hours, 72 hours, whatever the number is, 48 hours, maybe less depending on when you're watching this, maybe 24 hours. So you want to be aware of that so you can take advantage of our special program if that's something that you want. Remember, we're going to be helping you in all different areas, from autoimmune disease to brain health to gut health. The list goes on. Our experts are sharing so much wisdom inside of this program. Dr. Daniel Newsom, Dr. Brian Ardis, Dr. Henry Ely. These individuals have been working with people with their health for a long time. The COVID vaccine, before that even came out, before that was an issue, they've been helping people reverse their health conditions. I've been working in this field for a decade now, helping people as an investigative journalist, giving people the right solutions. And we have all of this information available to you to help you navigate this, I believe like no one else is doing right now, that is helping getting people to the root cause of what's going on and helping them solve the problem once and for all. I really appreciate you joining me. Remember, all these programs are available. We're giving it's over $2,000 now of free gifts inside of our Best Value Gold package, and then our other gifts are spread out across the different programs. You can check them out. Hundreds of dollars in all of the programs of free gifts available, and the 71% off discount and 50% plus for silver, all available right now when you place your order. But remember, if you come back later after it's closed and the prices have gone back up, or the bonuses are no longer available, or the program is completely closed because we're working with that group of people, just know that so that doesn't happen, you're disappointed. So I appreciate you considering this. Click the buttons or the banner below. I look forward to seeing you inside of our program and can't wait to see you in the next episode.